and welcome to Proving the Concept, the podcast where we look into the weird, the wonderful, and sometimes downright bizarre world of science and technology. I'm your host, Sarah Goffin, and today is a very exciting episode indeed. We have our very first guest on the podcast. So I'm delighted to invite Dr. Chloe Lim to the stage. So she is a pioneer within the science communication space and has a real passion, particularly when inspiring young minds to get them into the science field. So, hi, Chloe, welcome. And would you like to give our listeners a little bit more of an overview on yourself and what you do?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. It's an honor and privilege to be able to share a little bit about my story with your audience as well. I am a scientist. I have a PhD in medical science, and I was in medical research for over 14 years before moving into government. And now I work as a regulatory scientist. So still in the science field, but a little bit different, not much more of lab work, more desk work at the moment, but it's very interesting work still. And on the side, I also run a couple of businesses. So in addition to being a scientist, I am also a professional balloon artist. I twist balloons at parties, at corporate events, bringing joy to children with balloons. And I've also started a science education business called Twistyfics, where I merge balloons and science together to create fun science shows and workshops for children.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chloe. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about your balloon business because when I first heard about this, it's certainly not something I had put together in terms of areas. But what I really love with talking to scientists and science communicators, particularly, is this immense creativity people seem to have. And they bring these incredible ideas together. So tell us a little bit more about how you got into that space.
So, how I got into balloons was because my pastor needed someone to twist balloons at a community event. This was back in February 2019, about 6 years ago now. And no one put their hands up. And so I thought, oh, maybe I can give it a go. So I went to Kmart, bought a pack of balloons. And then, as you do when you want to learn something new, I went onto YouTube and looked at how to make a balloon dog. And so I gave it a go and I was like, oh, this is actually quite interesting. It's quite fun. And I kept looking for other videos to try. And before I knew it, I was hooked. And at that point in time, I was actually looking to start a business as well. So I thought, oh, maybe why don't I just do something with this? So that's how Giggly Wiggly Balloons was born.
That's awesome. And I think also touches on something else because I remember, although it was a while ago now, I remember being at school and, people talk about having your path planned out, people knowing what they wanted to do ever since they were a kid. I was not one of those people. I mean, I got into science because healthcare and science are kind of things I'm passionate about, but also I was a big fan of Dexter's Lab for any of those 90s kiddies out there or those growing up in the 90s. But absolutely, I think to kind of reassure our audience, perhaps what was it that you were interested in doing as a kid and how has that evolved over the years?
Gosh, no, I completely agree with you. Like, I actually, all scientists, I think most scientists got into science wanting to win the Nobel Prize, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did have that dream as well. I had that dream too. But it was interesting. I did love science from a young age, like, physics and chemistry. Maths was really a big thing for me as well. I didn't really grow up in a science environment, if you want to call it, I guess. Yeah, my dad was an engineer, but they weren't as proactive in instilling the love of science in the children. Somehow I got drawn to science subjects, and then when it got to deciding what to do for university, I also was drawn to looking at things that could help me understand how the body works. And that's how I got into medical science. I was actually on the pathway, academic career pathway, really. So I did my PhD, I did a postdoc, I became a research fellow as well. But somehow, somewhere along the line, I decided that research was not for me. And then that's how I got into government. How I got into starting a business is actually linked to the challenges that we have in the research environment where funding sometimes can be quite patchy. And for me, it was when I came back from maternity leave with my twin girls that my supervisor told me, oh, they don't have enough funding to give me the hours that I wanted. I was already coming back on part time hours, and they had to reduce the part time hours even more. And I've just gave birth to two children. I have two more mouths to feed. I've got another child as well before these two. So I realized that I couldn't depend on my job as a source of income. And that's how I got into starting my own business because I realized that I have to take ownership of my own income and create that job security for myself.
And I think that's really inspirational as well, because I think certainly something that I've really thought of as well is I think we as people have so many skills, and I think science gives you some really strong skills in analytics and interpreting data. But also, I think there's so much out there in terms of you as a person that you can really offer the world. And I think I really applaud you for going out there and putting yourself into the field and trying something new. I guess you've kind of touched on one of the reasons for kind of going into that being having more children, but I'd just like to touch a little bit more on your kids and how your passion for science is translated for them, and how do they feel about science and technology.
So my children have no choice in a way because they have scientists for parents.
Yep.
So, I've got a background in science. My husband is has a PhD in science as well, and we try to encourage that observational questions and also like critical thinking in our conversations and trying to help them to learn as they go if possible as much as we can anyway. And I think that relates back to how we can then encourage parents to encourage that scientific thinking in children as well, because I know that as a parent, I do get overwhelmed with all the things that we have to do with taking care of the family, the household, and we are working as well. So working parents it can be quite challenging to try and instill that love for science for children. But I think what I've learned is just in the everyday life, you can try and incorporate that love for science. So really incorporating observational questions, asking children, oh, why do you think this is? Or what do you think is happening here? And trying to instill that curiosity and helping them learn through their own curious questions. And I think that sort of lifts up, how do you say, that burden of trying to encourage children to learn science. There are lots of amazing resources out there. You've got your TV programs, your kids, different books as well. All of these things can help with that as well. So if you're really interested in, getting children to learn science, surround them with all these resources that can help them develop those scientific thinking skills.
And there's so many things I want to touch on there, but I guess before moving on, in terms of those books, you've got a children's book as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I mean, how I got into that book was actually quite interesting. So I have a children's book called What Makes You Unique, and it is published by Library for All, which is a non-profit organization with a mission to provide knowledge to everyone equally. So they want to get everyone to have access to education, access to books, regardless of where they are. And how I got onto writing this book was they had a write a children's book in a day workshop, and this was back when I was in academia, and they wanted to get some nonfiction books from researchers. So I attended a workshop and wrote a book about how our DNA makes us unique, and it was published back in 2019, and it's been a great stepping point really, because I've actually used that book to create fun science shows to engage children in science and to help them learn about what is it that how their body works and what is it that makes them unique. So part of my show also talks a little bit about cultural diversity and how people are all different, but that is the thing that makes us all amazing and special.
And it's such a positive message as well. And I think it's so important, as well as talking about the science and scientific thinking, it's really positive messages that, science is for everybody. I think, and I do feel like the paradigm is changing, that perhaps growing up, people had a very stereotypical view of scientists and what it means to be a scientist. And actually, I guess through more recent years, the ideas of science communication and seeing science podcasters and YouTubers and people putting out science content in a much more approachable way for people, I think is really fantastic. Tangenting for a second, going back to your mention about scientific thinking, I think there's also a part that we should really explore here about science and the field of science, but scientific thinking is really something everyone should learn. I remember there's been so many times in life I've thought about my uni degree and critical thinking being one of them, and thinking to myself, I should have learnt this at school. And I do believe that there are evolutions in this space, But I mean, again, perhaps we can talk a little bit more about the importance of learning how to think like a scientist, particularly with all the information that's out there these days.
Yeah, you've hit a really good point there, Sarah. I think the work that I'm doing, I don't expect, all children to become scientists, but I think what is important is to instill how to think scientifically, how to look at evidence and decide whether, a fact or something that's put forward to you is actually backed by evidence, backed by truth, backed by some source, a credible source that you can use then to support the recommendations or the judgment or your opinions on a specific topic. And you are so right, especially with the advent of AI, how things can be misconstrued or misrepresented, and things can just be presented in a way that looks like the truth, but it's not necessarily is the truth. And so I think it's so important that we instill these scientific thinking skills in children from an early age so that they can then start to develop that skill as they grow and to keep refining those skills. And so I think I think that there is definitely a huge demand and also opportunity here to really help children develop those skills as they navigate this really, I don't know, what do you call it, it's like this jumble of information
Yes.
that, yeah, that could be a mix of different things. And I think going back to the source of evidence, just developing that evidence-based thinking in a sense as well, is so important so that we can decide for ourselves what is actually the right thing and whether we can take that on as the source of truth.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of that as well, there's facts and there's things that we know through evidence, etc. And I think the other
Mm,
part of that is explaining to people that science is dynamic. So we build on
mm,
science. There's technologies we have now that we didn't have 50 years ago. And in 50 years, it's going to be the same thing. So we evolve our thinking with this technology. And I think sometimes the big challenge that I see, and great that you mentioned AI, because I think that's certainly one of them. But I think the need for really strong scientific and health literacy from the general public, particularly over the pandemic, has absolutely skyrocketed. Like I remember learning about mRNA when I was at uni, and it had just really started to be investigated. And suddenly, 10 so years on, there are mRNA vaccines. So I
mm,
think it's such an important thing for people to understand what that actually means, but also to, I guess, that curiosity that you were talking about. Don't be afraid to ask
mm,
questions. And those questions can be, oh, I wonder why this happens. But it can also be if somebody tells you a fact, well, how
mm,
true is this? How is it true in a
mm,
certain context and not in another context? And I think with AI, and again, these technologies come about very quickly before we've had a chance to really work out how the governance behind it is going to work in the general public. But again, reference checking, I'm sure, will get more rigorous. But it's really
mm,
having that awareness of what's coming through and what's being said, and just being prepared to ask those questions. And yes, I was definitely one of
mm.
those why kids, as you may be able to gather.
Well, I think it's so important to ask questions and just fact check because a lot there's so I think I'm not sure if you heard of this story about how there's an AI generated influencer per se who is actually
Oh,
giving medical information which may not necessarily be true. And
oh
so
wow.
I think even if you were to follow an influencer, right? I I think it's still important to go back to credible sources like government websites or really reputable health organization websites as well to check and make sure what they are saying is accurate. And it's especially when we're talking about health, this is something that
Yes.
can really impact life and the life of the people around you as well. So in any case, if you were to come across something interesting or something you feel like you want to adopt in your own life, I think it's really important to still check the source and make sure what they say is actually correct and accurate.
Absolutely. And I think what surprised me as I've been kind of digging in more in my socials as part of my business is these AI generated avatars. And I made one of my own, and I my techniques and being very someone that gesticulates a lot doesn't necessarily suit the current models of AI avatars. but they happen and they're real. And for some people, you really would struggle to tell the difference if you weren't an expert in that field. So I completely agree with you. And obviously, I think this touches on the Belle Gibson story in apple cider vinegar, which I know is more on the healthcare side. But I think, again, that's such an important story of the impact that fake science or false science can really have on people, because chemotherapy is a very, it's a very intensive type of therapy. It does have a lot of side effects, but for people that are very sick, it's something that is likely needed as prescribed by their consultant. But nutraceuticals do have a benefit to improve health on a more general stage, but isn't a substitute for medicine. And I think sometimes people want to take that more gentle route, but it's really making them aware of, if you do X, this is what that looks like potentially on a scale. And I think
Mm.
it's also becoming, again, more of a hot topic, both from what we were saying earlier, the science space, but also in healthcare. I think there's a lot that's come out, and certainly something that I'm very interested in finding out more about is particularly in the social media space, where Elon and Zuckerberg and others have talked about removing that fact check to promote free speech. I'm really keen to understand, is something going to happen from a legislative perspective to really support accurate information getting to the masses within those countries?
Mm. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And I guess something that definitely the government will have to look into to see how we can be governing that. Because in the end, I think the point of literacy, and I think that is the important thing, because I think there's only so much that we can manage, or we can, if you want to call it babysit, and it's not really babysitting,
Yeah,
but we don't want to be looking like we're babysitting people's ability to make decisions,
yeah.
or look at yeah, facts and evidence. But I think what is important is educating people and increasing their awareness as to how to ascertain if a source is credible and reputable. So I think that is probably a better way to circumvent this issue of challenges around whether things are correct or not.
I agree. And I definitely think, and it shouldn't be something that's scary. I think that people, and particularly parents, I imagine, it's really important to be able to have those open and honest conversations with your kids. If they come across something, don't be afraid to say, I don't have the answer, but, potentially here's some other sources that you can look at that might provide a different perspective. I guess a very tangented, nowhere near as severe example of this is I do daily science facts on my YouTube channel. And one of the facts that I did was around cows aligning to magnetic fields. Now, there's for and against publications for this. So it is something that is debated. There was a publication in Nature, there have been publications gone the other way. And the reason that I decided to go ahead with it was, when I assessed the data on both sides, I really felt that the rigor of the experiments done on kind of the for argument, at least in my mind, felt a bit more comprehensive than on the other. It doesn't necessarily mean it was right, but as a scientist looking at that data, that's where I felt. And that was my justification. And again, I think particularly when we get onto those very high science ideas, there can be debate in the field. And it isn't necessarily an easy case of, yes, this is correct, no, there isn't. But
Mm,
at the same
mm,
time, I think it's really being able to listen to both sides and really make up your own mind as to, why do I fit, and to be able to justify why. I think, as well as
mm.
asking the why of things, I think being able to justify your why in these situations is also super important.
I mean, you've mentioned before that science is dynamic,
Yeah.
and the thing is, the science will change depending on the information that we start to gather. So the more research we do, the more knowledge we get, the more insight and understanding we get around a process or a certain mechanism, and that can impact how then we interpret what comes out, what the results are, what the outcomes are, and how that applies to, in different aspects of science. So I think, like you said, I think it's so important to look at both sides of the story. And then there are actually principles out there, evidence-based principles that and checklists that you can use to decide whether a clinical trial or a source of information is actually it's actually good, robust, and strong. And you can use that as a way to decide whether that particular publication is actually a one that you can take as part of your evidence source. And I think I mean, this is getting very technical, I guess, because it kind of touches into the work that I do, where I actually do need to look at all of
Yeah.
these things and make sure they are right. But I think there are principles around robustness of a study and whether things can be justified, like you said before, and using all of those things to really form what I would call a totality of the evidence,
Yeah.
and to use that as a way to make your own judgment. And I guess the important thing is also to understand that there could be some fluidity around the I guess the ideas that you form as part of your research, and to be open to maybe discussion and also challenging opinions around that topic too. So really, I would say science is very much still a discourse,
Yes.
in terms of how things are meant to be, how information is presented, and to be open, I guess, as well to how things might change, because like I said, we live in a world where it's constantly changing, and uncertainty really is a big thing that everyone will have to face. Who knows what's going to happen in 5 and 10 years time? But I think having that ability to adapt, that flexibility in thinking, is also very important in how we navigate uncertainty in this world.
It really is. And I think also goes back to that really paving your own way and finding the path that works best for you. So I think that's been a really awesome discussion on the fact checking and the scientific rigor that we should all place on what we come across in terms of information. And I'd like to kind of change tack a little bit and get back to a little bit of what inspires you, and maybe talk a little bit more about, obviously you do some fantastic work and are very well respected in your field. Who are the people that really inspire you to keep going within science, and I guess the beyond part?
Oh, yeah. So I came across Shalmina Babai Abji's work. I'm not sure if you know her work, but she was an IBM executive in the US, and she's
Okay.
written a book called Show Your Worth, which I thought was such a fantastic book, which I wished I had when I was in my academic career. And I think I'm just very inspired by her resilience, because she had personal challenges, which she talks about in her book. But in midst of all of those things, she was able to climb the career ladder in science in a very competitive, male dominated field. And I think a lot of times, especially women in STEM and women in science, we we know that there's this issue of glass ceilings and being culturally diverse, bamboo ceilings, where there women are not seen in leadership positions, much more so if you're culturally diverse as well. And the challenge that comes into play is you've got personal challenges, like you decide to have a family and then take some time off work and all those sort of things. But there's also, I guess, systemic biases that come into play that really impacts how your career progresses. And and so for me, I find that it's so important for someone who's in science right now, or who's thinking of going into science, to not let those things be a barrier to what they want to do in life, but to take them on as challenges to overcome. And what I love about her work is she gives you very practical steps to really build your career, especially if you want to be in science. And I mean, what she shares is not just applicable to people in science, but just women in general as well. So for me, I think it's so important to help other women to achieve their full potential, to help them to get to where they want to be, to achieve the success that they have defined for themselves. And I think that's the important thing, is a lot of people see everyone else's achievements, especially on LinkedIn,
Yes.
and feel like they are not enough. But I think what is important is understanding what the success means to you, and then you take those steps to reach the goal and dreams that you have set for yourself.
I really love that. And I guess I'd just like to conclude on that point as well, as I slowly creep towards the 4-0 in a couple of years' time. For me, I feel as though my definition of success has certainly changed over the years. I think, again, going back to that, people get into science because they want to win a Nobel Prize. They're very driven on that career ladder. That was definitely me throughout my school life. That was me through my university career. And it was me for a long time in my kind of early life and moving into corporate. But I do feel as though in the more recent years, I've reframed my idea of success from, promotions, etc., to happiness and what my happiness scale looks like. So am I happy at home? Am I happy with my husband and my wonderful, albeit yappy dog? And is this the life that I want to build for myself? And I think again, that's really applicable to everybody. And I do feel that with age comes wisdom. It's definitely been very, very true to me.
Yeah, no, we hope wisdom comes with age. Not, it doesn't necessarily mean it does for some people.
Yes, yes, that's
And
very
hence
true
why we
too.
have to keep learning. I'm a huge, huge proponent for lifelong learning, and so and that curiosity. So yeah, if you want to gain that wisdom, you do have to keep reading and keep learning. Yeah, and keep expanding your mind.
I completely agree with you. And Chloe, I could talk to you all day. I think you're a fantastic person and just a great podcast guest for the day. But unfortunately, we are running out of time quite swiftly. So, again, just as a highlight about what you've got going on. So, please feel free to add anything that I've missed, and perhaps you can add a little bit of clarity. So, you've got your book, What Makes You You, which is available. You also have your scientific events coming up, which you've got to help encourage kids into science. And you also have a podcast of your own, I believe.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So to touch on all those things, my book, What Makes You Unique, is available on Amazon, and all the sales go back to supporting Library for All's mission. And yes, I've actually been very thankful. I've got the ACT STEM event grant to run free science shows for the community during the April school holidays. So please do check it out. If you're in Canberra, feel free to come and join us, and we're going to learn more about DNA and how it makes you unique. And finally, yes, I do have a podcast as well, and it's called Called Voices in STEM. So in this podcast, I interview amazing women in STEM. Season 2 at the moment, which is focused on women in Canberra. What I do is to highlight their career challenges and successes and achievements as a way to inspire girls and women in STEM to get onto science if they're not sure, but also it serves as a way to increase the visibility and representation of these amazing women in STEM. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Chloe. And thanks to everyone out there listening today. So, really hope you like this podcast, especially since it's our first guest. So, please do feel free to share your comments and ratings with us. And also, if you are interested in this comment, please do remember to like and subscribe. And we shall hopefully have more coming out in the weeks and months to come. So, watch this space. But once again, thank you so much for your time today, Chloe, and thanks to everyone out there for listening. And I'm Sarah, and we will catch up very soon. Bye.